Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer. For this video we're going to be doing something a bit different, as we're going to showcase and go over the Meteoric Ore Blade build and then go over all katanas ranked in Eldenring. I'll show off each of my favorite builds for the katanas to optimize them for damage at rune level 150. We're on New Game Plus 7 here and we'll be going over the Meteoric Ore Blade first before we rank and go over katana builds for all of them. There's of course a Rivers of Blood and Moonveil build for those looking. Before we continue though, a quick shout out to ExpressVPN, the VPN I use and trust. It's a great way to keep your browsing safe and more private. Check out the link below for a discount and 3 extra months free on the yearly subscription. Godfrey Golden Shade was my test dummy of sorts. Having moved stats around twice for this weapon and talismans, I eventually came up with a solid build for the Meteoric Ore Blade, figuring out how the ash scales and how the weapon itself does in combat. As far as the Meteoric Ore Blade, it's not going to be the most overpowered katana in the game. We're going to go over that when we rank all of them. However, it can be quite good. It has a very fun Ash of War that's definitely better for mobs and NPC invaders and such than it is bosses, but overall it's a solid katana that's not super overpowered. And I did test out a couple of different setups on Golden Shade, and it ended up being a longer fight than I would prefer. Most weapons for me, Golden Shade is fairly simple, but in this case he ended up being more on the difficult side because of the way the katana is, and also because I wasn't used to this weapon. This was not a weapon that I've used a lot before this video. One thing that's a huge bonus that we're going to talk about throughout this video, or the first section where we go over the Meteoric Ore Blade build, is how much poise damage the charged attacks on this katana can do. They're really impressive as far as the charged attacks and poise damage. You can get a solid amount of posture buildup and posture damage simply by using the charged attacks on the Meteoric Ore Blade. And after a pretty epic battle, Golden Shade's going to go down here, and we're going to move on talking about how easy this weapon is against NPC invaders and enemies with low poise as we go on to fight this one here before Morgott. Against NPC invaders and regular enemies, this is one of a few weapons that can easily stun lock with little effort required. If it has low poise, the Ash of War on the Meteoric Ore Blade, Gravitas, will stun lock them and essentially make those fights a cakewalk. And yeah, it's pretty easy just to pull them in and constantly stun lock, and then you have that awesome poise damage on the charged attacks, and then finish off whatever NPC invader or low poise enemy you're facing. Next up here is Morgott. As I continued to learn the Meteoric Ore Blade, I realized against Golden Shade, as I mentioned earlier, how good the charged attacks on the Meteoric Ore Blade are in terms of damage and posture damage. This is significant for a katana class. And even though I wouldn't get a break on Morgott, its charged attack seems to do more poise damage than any of the other katanas. Keep in mind though that this is New Game Plus 7, so each enemy becomes harder to break as you go on with the New Game Pluses. Essentially by New Game Plus 7 they have about 30% more poise, so it becomes more difficult to break them. Having said that, I was comparing this against the other charged attacks on the other katanas, and this seems to be the winner for charged attacks and poise damage. And keep in mind, I'm not factoring in Ashes of War that increase poise damage or anything like that. We're talking about charged attacks only, and this seems to do a fairly good amount of posture for a simple charged attack. That being said, the R2 downward strike looks cool, especially on a katana, because it's definitely something fitting for a katana moveset, and the Ash of War isn't the most damaging. We've talked about that when you're utilizing it in combat. I went for getting a 60 strength with two-handing with 40 intelligence to optimize the weapon's damage at rune level 150 as much as I could. You can add in some spells, which I'll show in a bit, as the Meteorite Staff is a good addition with Rock Sling to combo with this setup. You can continue poise damage with that too, so it's an awesome combo. At higher levels like 200, this becomes a solid mage sidearm that is definitely worth a look. Now, as we finish the fight with Morgott, you're going to see me again in combat using the katana a lot in many different ways. Charge attacks, jump attacks, the Ash of War, everything. It's not going to be something that's going to carry you through the game, that's for sure, but it can be powerful when utilized the right way. And the more I fought with this katana, the more the Meteoric Ore Blade actually grew on me. This katana, by the end of this, actually grew on me so much that I'm considering using it for my mage character as a sidearm, because it's really cool looking. It has a cool moveset, and the Ash of War, although it's very situational, it still can be useful in combat. Overall, a solid katana. Where do you get the basics? Well, if you're going to run spells, you're going to want this one, and that's the Meteorite Staff. I'll show it on the map in Caelid. That's where you get that there. And then also in Caelid is where you get the Meteoric Ore Blade, which I'm going to show you now. Now, these are in a different set of ruins. Here, you'll have to either defeat the enemies below or run past them like I did, and you can grab the Meteoric Ore Blade at the bottom in a chest. This weapon can be grabbed from the start of the game too, and it has some innate bleed on it as a nice bonus as well. And I'm going to show you on the map where it is in Caleb. I think I showed it already, and this is where you're going to get the Meteoric Ore Blade. And I did already show it on the map once, so that's where you get it in Caled. You're just going to have to run down here, either fight or avoid the enemies, and you can grab the Meteoric Ore Blade, and now we're going to talk about the Magic Scorpion Charm. I field tested how well the Magic Scorpion Charm works on the Ash, and the Gravitas Ash of War does magic damage. Obviously, I didn't know how much the physical component was, but I ended up figuring out that it's roughly between a 10 and 11% increase when using the Magic Scorpion Charm. Now that's slightly less than the regular 12%, it still makes it really useful for this build, as I did this multiple times and got the same numbers, 464 without the charm and 520 with it. Gatefront is a great place to test weapons too if you're ever looking for a place to try out weapons. Using everything together here, including Rock Sling for mainly adding poise, damage, and pressure, turned out quite well. The weapon and Ash are pretty middle of the pack, so the weapon itself isn't going to carry you through the game, but it is fun to use and you can make a solid build out of it. If you want even more damage on the spells, you can run another Meteorite Staff for the passive boost, or the Jellyfish Shield as well. Combining Rock Sling and charge attacks is a great way to do posture damage consistently and break even the toughest of bosses. I recommend combining them together in combat simply for that alone, as the posture resets on all bosses after 6 seconds, I think regular enemies too, and Rock Sling can keep the pressure on when you have to back off in the fight. The combo works very well together. Now, if you're going to do this with my setup at rune level 150, you're not going to get a ton of damage out of this spells, because I worked more around building the AR and the damage on the Ash and the weapon itself for charged attacks in terms of the Katana. You can use the Axe Talisman if you want to boost that further, by the way. But yeah, you will get a lot of posture damage as a setup. And for buffs, we started with Drinking Earth Tear, then we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. And then you can fill up your FP at that point, and we have the Ash of War Gravitas, which can pull enemies in, and then you have that awesome Slam Down charged attack for a lot of posture damage. Let's get new equipment. For equipment, we have the Meteoric Ore Blade plus 10 preferably, we have the Meteorite Staff, we have the Black Flame Monk Hood, Elden Lord Armor, Twin Gauntlets, Scaled Greaves, we have the Ritual Shield Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, we have the Fate tier for buffs and the Magic tier. Let's get into stats for this one. For stats, it's a strength and intelligence build. It does lean more towards strength because there's a high physical component on the katana itself. We got the 40 strength, which gives us 60 when two-handing, and then we have 40 intelligence as well, and we got good AR out of the katana. Here we go, part 2 of the video, ranking all katanas in Elden Ring with builds. Normally I go from worst to best, but from here I'll be going from my personal favorite and best all the way to the least best in my opinion. And at number 1 I have the Uchigatana, which does a ton of damage, beats out the Nagakiba in pretty much everything except reach, and is incredibly versatile, and you can throw a ton of different awesome Ash of Wars on this. This is a fantastic katana. Let's get new equipment. For equipment, we have the Uchigatana plus 25 preferably in keen affinity. We're using Bloodflame Blade. I think I have the same armor set I had on before. We have Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Shard of Alexander, Fate tier for buffs, the Thorny tier. Let's get into stats. Now for stats for this one in keen affinity, it's going to get an A, which is fantastic. We're going to pump pretty much everything into dexterity. We hit 60 vigor as well, have a decent amount of mind and endurance, and all around a solid build for the starting katana. At number 2 we have the Nagakiba, which is really awesome. It's almost as good as the first one, but the first one just scales better with a lot of stuff so you can get more damage out of it. But the thing is, we have more reach with this. The Nagakiba does beat it in reach, so it has that at its advantage. And for me, I really like Bloodblade with this. You're going to see on the Godskin Noble, we're absolutely going to shred him with Bloodblade on the Nagakiba. If you put this on a Colt, you can essentially focus on one stat, and that's Arcane, after you get the requirements of 18 Strength and 22 Dexterity that you need from the Nagakiba. But aside from that, you'll be able to get fantastic damage out of it and absolutely shred bosses with Bloodblade. Or if, like the first build, you want to use Double Slash, it's excellent on the Nagakiba as well. For equipment, we have the Occult Nagakiba plus 25 with Blood Blade. I believe we have the same armor set on. We had the Dragon Communion Seal for a lot of these because it scales with Arcane, so why not? Dragon Crest Great Shield, Talisman, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Shard of Alexander, Faith Tier for buffs, Thorny Tier if you're doing regular hits for successive attacks. Let's get into stats. We have 60 Vigor, and since it's on Occult, we have 60 Arcane as well for a lot of damage for a solid build and setup for Bloodblade and the Nagakiba. And next up here at number 3, we have Moonveil. Okay, so a lot of you might be thinking this belonged at number 1. Here's my main issue with Moonveil. It has one of the biggest drop-offs for a weapon on New Game Plus and beyond. Its drop-off is actually quite dramatic. By the time you hit Journey 3 or later, as getting 1600 to 2000 damage per Ash starts to feel like not enough, especially if you're battling the bosses in the late game stretch. And no, this Magma Worm's not on the late game stretch. I just wanted to do this ranking system as a bonus on top of the initial build, and for me, I wanted to keep it at a reasonable time for the entire video in its whole and kind of have it half and half. If I went and fought main bosses, it could have easily turned into a 30-minute video, so I tried to make it reasonable, and it ended up being a lot of fun doing the rankings on top of the Meteoric Ore Blade build. That being said, Moonveil does a good amount of poise damage, by the way. It does a decent amount of magic damage, and then it's just really a great weapon for a lot of different situations, but it does have that drop off on New Game Plus and beyond, so definitely be aware of that. The first two on there could definitely do more damage in terms of later bosses and when stuff gets a lot of HP. That being said, let's get new equipment for the Moonveil setup, preferably plus 10. I had it at plus 9 because I run out of Somber Stones, Ancient Dragon Somber Stones, and I had the same armor set on. Any seal will do. Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Faith Tier, the Magic Tier. Let's get into the 150 stats for this one, and for this I went with 40 Dexterity and 40 Intelligence, pretty much split on the build, but the higher level you are, the better you're going to get damage-wise out of Moonveil, because it does scale well with two stats, both Dexterity and your Intelligence stat. At number 4, we have the Rivers of Blood. This is a weapon that has been nerfed at least 3 times that I can recall, having fallen from grace in its glory days at launch when it was ridiculously overpowered. The Rivers of Blood has an issue in that double slash with Blood Flame Blade and solid stats. The starting katana and Nagakiba can both beat out the Rivers of Blood in damage. Remember the days at launch, if you do remember way back then, when Corpse Piler and the Rivers of Blood were just ridiculous. You could proc bleed several times with one use of its Ash of War. Now you're lucky if you get one bleed proc throughout the entire duration. And I can't help but wonder if they had hit the Rivers of Blood after they decided to split PvP and PvE nerfing, because they eventually decided to split the two, but prior to that they were just nerfing everything across the board. If it would have survived a little bit better and maybe not been over-nerfed a little bit to the point where it's just not as good as a standard double slash on the starting katana for the Nagakiba. I'm not sure that it was intended to be less than those weapons, and it's still a very good weapon, don't get me wrong. It does have the fire damage added to it, and you can get a decent amount of bleed, but it certainly isn't what it used to be, and you can beat it out by putting the Ash of Wars on the other katanas, which again, I'm not sure if that was intended at this point. It does feel like a weapon that's been nerfed one too many times. And as we take down the Scarlet Rot Dragon, I will say this, the Rivers of Blood is still incredibly fun to use, and it is one of the simplest weapons in concept as well. You just basically hit the same button over and over again, and you're going to get damage out of it. If you see me here, by the way, since I'm using the Dragon Communion Seal, much like the Blood Blade build where we have an investment in Arcane, we can throw in something like Swarm of Flies to add versatility to our build, and to continue to build up bleed while we're at a distance. Let's get new equipment. For equipment, we have the Rivers of Blood, preferably plus 10, Dragon Communion Seal. We have the same set of armor on, Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Shard of Alexander. Then we have the Thorny tier again and the Faith tier for buffs. Let's get into stats. Now for stats, this is a Dexterity and Arcane build. We're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength, by the way, for most of these. And as I mentioned, we added in Swarm of Flies because we're using the Dragon Communion Seal, and you can continue to build up bleed from a distance. At number 5, we have the Hand of Malenia, a powerful weapon for PvP, but a weapon that's pretty middle of the pack for PvE. It builds up on successive attacks, but not as much as you would think. Now, you can proc Rotten Wing Sword Insignia on the first hit, basically the first action of Waterfowl Dance, so you're going to have 3 of them essentially, but you won't get the full complement of damage until the second or third, despite the clear, ridiculous number of hits each one does. That being said, it has the highest physical damage of any katana, so that's impressive, and it scales really well with dexterity. But that being said, the Ash of War, as you can tell here, is pretty middle of the pack. Also, you can be knocked out of it fairly frequently. I have over 51 poise, which is a decent amount, and I'm still getting knocked out of it by essentially any hit. Even with that said, though, when you're able to get this Ash of War off, it does do a fairly good amount of damage, which makes it perfect for number 5 in this video and a solid dexterity weapon overall. Let's get into equipment for this one. For equipment, we have the Hand of Malenia plus 10 preferably. We have any seal, the same set of armor I've been running to get 51 poise, Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Maleficent's Prosthesis, Shard of Alexander, Faith Tier, Thorny Tier. Let's get into stats for this one. Now, Bloodflame Blade can't go on this. That was from a previous build, but I was using Golden Bow and Flame Grant Me Strength again. We have 60 Vigor, and again here, a high amount of Dexterity to take advantage of the good dex scaling this katana has. At number 6, we have the Meteoric Ore Blade, which I'll show off once more here, having fully optimized the build by the time I showed stats, so I won't repeat the stats and equipment here. The Meteoric Ore Blade is a cool strength and intelligence katana, but unfortunately it falls into the same realm as the Hand of Malenia. And what do I mean by that? It doesn't have quite the damage cap that the Hand of Malenia or Waterfowl Dance has, but it falls in that same category because it has a relatively awkward Ash of War. It has good damage on the weapon itself, the katana itself. It does fantastic poise damage on the charge attacks, but it falls into an awkward place simply because of its Ash of War. This is still a really cool weapon, and don't get me wrong, on my mage character I may end up using the Meteoric Ore Blade as a side weapon for a mage. It's pretty much perfect. It's awesome for that as a strength and intelligence weapon, but for most builds, if you're trying to build around one individual weapon, certainly with the Ash of War at times, just doesn't feel like quite enough. So definitely take that into account when you're thinking about using the Meteoric Ore Blade, that it's a really fun and powerful weapon to use as like a sidearm, but if you're looking for a main weapon that can carry you through the game, Meteoric Ore Blade does not fall into that. It's just not really good enough to build around, to kind of carry you through the game and make life a lot easier like some of the other katanas, like the Uchigatana and the Nagakiba Wood, or even the Rivers of Blood or Moonveil. And again, it's a weapon that I really like, so it is worth a try, and I did build around it at the beginning of this video. It was fun to do that. Next up here at number 7, we have the Serpentbone Blade, which is basically tied with the last one on this list as well, and is just really an okay katana. The issue with the Serpentbone Blade is a very simple and straightforward one, that even deadly poison isn't that great, especially when you're locked behind double slash on a non-bleed weapon. I still have no idea why you can't put an Ash of War on this weapon, as it would up its versatility a ton and make it much more viable. Sure, it can do a lot of damage and you can proc Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, but it does feel lackluster at times, and for this we have the Serpentbone Blade, preferably plus 25. Any seal will do. We had the Knight's Cavalry set with the Drake Knight Gauntlets, Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, Maleficent's Prosthesis, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Shard of Alexander, Thorny Tier, Faith Tier for buffs. Let's get into stats. This is purely a dexterity weapon. Again, here you're going to invest a lot in dexterity, and you can take advantage of double slash and the deadly poison, and that extra 20% damage from Kindred of Rot's Exaltation. You can use Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength as well. And last on this list at number 8, we have the Dragonscale Blade. Now, unfortunately, this one falls into another awkward place, and that's why it's tied with the Serpentbone Blade. It has Ice Lightning Sword, which is a good way to, I guess, get a little bit of extra frost on your katana, but overall the Ash of War is basically in the middle of pretty much all the weapons in the game, and that's on a good day. It might even just be flat out bad compared to the other Dex Lightning options, and certainly Faith Lightning options. This is the only character, by the way, that I didn't do at 150. I have 150 stats, though, which are similar to the Serpentbone Blade to show you for anybody that's using this timestamp. But yeah, this character was the only one that apparently had this katana, and this katana is a little bit out of the way. It's in the Lake of Rot from the Dragonkin neck. I also have no idea what journey this character is on. I really wish they would add something to the game that will allow us to tell what journey we're on. I do find that frustrating at times. I have no idea what journey this character was on. It may be New Game Plus 7, it could be a journey or two before that. Anyways, there's the Dragonscale Blade for you, and it is last on my list. Let's get new equipment. For equipment, we have the Dragonscale Blade plus 10. We had the finger seal, but any seal will do. I think I had the Knight's Cavalry set on again, but it wasn't altered this time. We had the Lightning Scorpion Charm, Ritual Sword Talisman, Ritual Shield Talisman, Shard of Alexander, the Lightning tier to boost it even further, and then the Defense tier. Let's get into stats. So for stats, it's similar to other builds, but just in case people are using this time-stamped, you're going to invest heavily into Dexterity here. Go for 60 Vigor as well, because this can be a tough one to use at times, but you're going to get a lot of damage from the Lightning out of Dexterity. Also note that Bloodflame Blade was just there, I wasn't using it for that build, and the Dragon Halberd actually beats out the Dragonscale Blade in a lot of ways, so be sure to check out that weapon too. Thanks for watching this one. This was by far the most detailed katana video I've ever done, and I hope everybody enjoyed this build for the Meteoric Ore Blade and then all the katanas ranked as well. If you're not subbed to the channel, now's the time to sub. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching.